This is part 2 of our watercolor review and demonstration using metallic watercolors. Hello, I'm Alisa of Alisa Laporte Art, and today we are going to demo the metallic watercolors that we reviewed in our last video. If you would like to see more reviews and demonstrations, you can check out these videos right here, and I will leave their links in the description below. Let's go paint! Okay, now that we're ready to start, I have my paints, I have some water, and I have my brushes. So we have this B here. We're gonna tape it down onto our board. This is about a 5x7. I don't want all of this to bleed into my painting, so I'm just gonna take my kneaded eraser and roll it. So I still see my lines, but it's not gonna bleed into it. First thing we're gonna do is wet our paper, and we're gonna apply pigment to where we want it using the wet on wet technique. We're just gonna wet our entire painting with water. We don't wanna go in right away. We want to let that water soak into our paper for a minute, and I'm gonna get some pigment ready for us to use, and we're gonna do a mingled wash using some greens and yellows to create that kind of blurred background I want. So when this paper has just lost its shine, that is when I'm going to start adding my paint. You can see it's just lost that shine, so I'm gonna go in very loose. Remember, don't try to go too close to where you want those white edges, because it is gonna bleed into those areas here. I want a little bit darker tone. And a little trick, if your green is a little too green, you can add just a touch of red to it, and it'll neutralize that a little bit, because green and red are complements. So I have some of these edges here, just showing that there's some greenery going on there. I want it to be fairly green by this bumblebee. I'm gonna go through where those wings are. I don't care if it's completely white. I just want it a little bit lighter where those wings are. Now I'm gonna go into my yellows. There's maybe some yellows back in here from other flowers. And then the other thing I will do is take some fresh water while it's still wet, and I'm gonna just drop a few splotches of pure water, and it will create some blossoms, which will give it a nice look. If you want it a little bit thicker and darker in some places, you want to thicken up your paint, just add more pigment to your water and it'll thicken up. And go ahead and add that before it's dried too much. Again, take my clean brush that's got a little bit of fresh water on it, but then you dry it. Go over where those wings are gonna be. Now we're gonna let it be and dry, and then we'll come over and start defining some of our edges and everything. Our painting is now dry, so we're gonna go in and start defining our bee. I just want these to be very light and in the background, like the greenery is just really pushed back there. We might add a little bit more, but for now we want it fairly simple and fairly loose. Okay, for the first part, I'm gonna add some of this bronze for this part of the bee. It's kind of a bronze and copper that I'm seeing there. So I'll go into my copper just here, and you can follow along with me. Pause the video if you need. This is just going to be a fairly simple painting. You don't have to use the metallics. You can just use like an Indian yellow for this area and maybe a lemon yellow or an azo yellow. I'm going to use our light gold for this part of the body. I'm also going to create a little bit of that fuzz using some of that. And I created a black mixture here. I made my own instead of using it just because I feel like it has a lot more life. I created a video over here showing that, and I will leave a link in the description. So here we're gonna go and do our black stripes. It's okay if things bleed in a little bit. Use some of this here at the top. I'm going to get that onto my smaller brush. Use more of my black to define some of these edges here in the body, the eyes, and I'll use my rigger brush to do these thinner lines. And I did that one side, and then I'm gonna just clean my brush and wet it and bleed the rest of that leg over just to give it some more dimension. So it looks like the leg is turning instead of just being all black. We'll do this leg as well. And there's one here. We have the antennae. I'm gonna go into some of my Indian yellow here and just touch in some areas on his back. Not too much. You can always add some of that black later. This here kind of blends out. He's got kind of like fuzzies. And we'll take a little bit of this and create some of our wing. They're kind of a brown. Just do little lines to create the wings. You don't have to be too precise with them. Just indicating that there's like little veins within the wings. It's a little bit here, a little bit here. And then we'll add a little bit of black just to darken some of those areas up in his wings. Okay, in this flower, he's got quite a bit in there. We didn't do the underside, so I'll do that now. Just adding a little bit more of that Indian yellow. Connect him. And we'll go into our flower here. I'm gonna go back to my size 6 brush. Take some of my cad yellow. Start with a lighter color, and I'm just gonna create little lines that indicate this part of the flower. I don't know what that's called. If anybody knows, you can let me know in the comments. I'm very curious. Not very technical with flower names and parts of the flowers. I don't want to be too detailed with it. More detailed than around here, but a little bit less detailed than our bumblebee, because we really want our bee to be the star of the show. We'll go into our Indian yellow, creating some darker tones. It's a little darker underneath his body and over here. Then I'm going to take my brush with just some fresh water, kind of dry it off a little bit before you go in, and bleed some of that out. Well, here it's feeling kind of flat and I want to round it out a little bit more, so I'm going to go back in and use my yellow gold this time. And just right here by the black, add a little bit of that, and that will make it so the top part is very light, and then this middle will have a mid-tone, and then it goes into that black there, so it really makes it look like it's rounding over. It's a very fuzzy bee. I like bees. Not when they're flying around me, but I like bees because they give us honey and flowers and pollinate all my plants so I can have vegetables. And I love that. Do you guys like to plant a garden? What do you guys plant in your gardens? I'm just pulling some of that black that I had into it to make it look a little bit more fuzzy in some areas. I'm just waiting kind of for this area right here to dry a little bit more. And while it's doing that, I'm going to go in and define a little bit more the petals around this part of the flower, of this flower specifically. The other ones I'm not going to bother. So I'm just going to go in and define those shapes a little bit more. Not too much, just maybe a few spots. See how that defines that flower there when we did that negative space? We didn't do much, we didn't play with the flower, we just added a little bit of negative space there, and it really makes that flower pop out. And that's what we want. We want this flower and this bee to be the central focus of our painting. So we're just defining where the flower is and where the flower isn't. And I'm going to just blend this off because that's where I'm going back into that blurriness. So this edge will be defined a little bit more than this edge, but less than here. You see that? I am going to put a little bit more definition of what I want here. Some details there with that flower. And then again, bleed that off. Just taking some fresh water, dry off your brush a little bit so it's not dripping with water, and then you can pull that out. See these different shapes we're creating. I'm even going to create a few extra lines here, like the greenery is showing through over here. In some places, not everywhere. I don't want to overwhelm it and do too much. This part's going to be a little bit more tough because we are going into this spot where we want it blurry. So do the same technique we did over here. We're just going to bleed off the edges here. So it is defined on this side, but blurries back up over here. Blurry's even a word. Gets more blurry. Okay, again, fresh water. So you have to be fairly quick at this point. Make sure you're not dry brushing. And it's okay if it doesn't look perfect because then it adds to that blurry effect we're wanting, where it doesn't look just too even. So it's okay. You can even add a little bit more darkness into some of these areas here, just to blend that out if you need to. Here I'm just going in with water to blend out and soften some of those edges. I might even go in and define a few of these flowers here. I don't want to too much because this flower is secondary to the main flower in B. I just don't want it to look completely shapeless. So I'm just making sure it looks a little bit more like a flower. Your eye will read that it's a flower. Even if it's not completely, you know, spelled out as a flower, it'll still read like a flower. Your eyes will fill in those blanks. I really like how this is going. And it's okay that it's bled in here. That just adds to the painterly feel that we want. I'm gonna darken up this edge a little bit more. I feel like it lightened up. I'm gonna add little hairs from the bee. So it has little fuzzies. Because you won't be able to see them if you just do it with the light colors. So I'm just adding a little bit of that dark, almost like hairs. So it appears like the black is going through all that fuzzy hair. By now, this is all dry. And I am going to take my Indian yellow. I want to darken it just a touch for the shadow under the bee. So I just added, what color is this? I added this kind of reddish brown color here. You can add a burnt sienna, that will work. And I'm going to do negative and positive space painting here. So I'm painting in the negative, but I'm also painting in the positive, depending on which side I'm working on. So down here I'm working negative, up there positive. Just in a few spots. A few spots here as well. And then we're gonna do the same thing we did there. We're gonna kind of bleed and blend things because I don't want it too finicky looking. I want it to be more of a wash. This is a great way to lay it in so that you have those defined lines that you want. And then when you go in and just blend it off, it will appear as if you created the wash and it just naturally bled into those shapes. It's a great effect. I love doing that. I don't want it to look too pristine and perfect. Go in with a lighter cad yellow in some areas just to create a more in-depth effect. And then on the outside here you can see all these kind of come out, and that's what we're gonna do. Just random little parts of this flower. Different colors. I'm gonna go back and forth between that Indian yellow and our cad yellow. Don't want to be too same. I think I missed some in here. Okay, loving that. And I want to add a little bit more of that bronze. And then some of this copper. You can add some in here because this will show up on the black. We already know that from our test before. So we can actually get some, now that we have the black here, we can get some of that fuzziness in some parts. And even some highlights if we need. I'm actually going to use the silver from some highlights in here instead of a white paint, since this is fairly opaque. I like the idea of using the silver instead of a white. Here's some of these highlights. I'm going to use some more of this yellow for some of the fuzzies on his legs. Maybe a little in there, just for some sparkle, because I had it on my brush. Now we're going to create some shadows in our flower. We just want to take some of that black we made earlier and add quite a bit more water to it so that it just tones it down and makes it a very, very pale gray, kind of a blue gray. That's the color of our shadows. Feel like it's too light, you can add a little bit more of that. See, we have this here. You're not going to see too much. This is going to define our flower even more. I don't really like how that is, so I'm going to fix it in a minute. Okay, just keep, getting those shadows. You don't want them too dark. I'm not going to do as many as is actually in the painting or in the picture, because I want this to be still fairly loose and not about the flower. I want it to be about the bee. But I want enough shadow on here to make it more realistic. Some interesting shapes. You can use some of that greenery that's in there to your advantage, like it's a shadow of some sort. Blend some of that out. Like I said, I didn't care for how that was looking. Now that I've come back and kind of had a better eye on it. It's always good to step away from your painting, come back to it. That way you can see things that you might have missed before, because it happens. You get so involved and ingrained in kind of what you're doing that sometimes we forget what we're actually doing or where things are going, or we just don't pay attention. I'm just gonna lighten and work on some of those shadows. And then now that some of them are dry, or almost dry, what we'll do is kind of darken a few more spots on there, and then I think we'll call it good. I might darken up a little bit in that shadow area here, I saw some that looked a lot darker, some spots. And then I'm going to, of course, bleed some of that, just so I don't want too many hard edges on that. I think the other thing I'm going to do, I was thinking about doing it with white, but I'll do it again with this silver, is there's a little band of light on the edge of this wing, the wings here, and I really want to get that, and I think the silver will make a really nice touch with those wings, so they really look like they're shimmering. And just go over some of those lines in a few areas just to really capture those beautiful wings. Go in with a little bit darker shade and darken a few lines and bleed them out just a little bit more so that the shadow has a little bit more dimension to it, a little bit more depth. It's just playing kind of back and forth between adding a little bit more dark and then blending it in. That in. It's a little too dark, so I'm going to lighten that up. Here. Again, lighten it up. So It's looking beautiful. And we can add a little bit of that shadow in our flower back here. Just put some of that in, and then you're going to really blend that out. Just so it looks like it's got some depth in that flower. I said not too much, just a little bit. Okay, you can step back and look at it. I think I want to darken around the wings a little bit more because I want those to look a little bit more translucent than they are. Time to my green, I'm going to add some blue because I want a darker green. So I'm going to add ultramarine blue, and want to be around the wings a little bit, and then I'm gonna of course bleed that out before it dries. I don't want any hard edges here. I'm gonna add a little bit more of this yellow to this side. Want it to bounce around. It's good to have the colors bounce around, then your eye will follow it. So play with that until you're satisfied. I think that makes it pop a little bit more. And I'm gonna actually go in with a few spots, not painting in the whole thing, adding a little bit more depth, a little bit more information of maybe what's going on back there. And maybe those are some of the stems of our flower, or the leaves. And a little bit more darkness over here. Again, blending it out, I want soft edges. Those soft edges are going to keep us in the picture and focused on where we have our hard edges, which is around the bee. Just darkening up a few places, really making that pop, giving it somewhere for our eyes to move. I think I want to do some of these where we can see the petals kind of coming out. I really love how our metallics look for this bee. I'm going to actually go in and add some copper. I think I want to add it to my flower a little bit. Again, like I said, we don't want to add just one color, especially if it's a very prominent color in our picture. We don't want it to be the only thing there. We want it to bounce around our painting a little bit. So this will add some of that metallic into another dimension of our painting. I think I see some over here where the sun is kind of shining down on our little friend here. Almost makes it look like the flower itself is kind of glowing and picking up that sunlight. And the last thing we're going to do is sign our painting. We're going to do that just always deciding which side to do it on. I don't want it too noticeable, but you want to know that it's there. I always have to sign mine angular. Does anybody else have to do that? I can't sign straight. I have to turn my paper always, always, always. I'm gonna go with a dark green. So I want it, like I said, I want you to be able to see it, but I don't want it to distract from the rest of the painting. I don't know why I always do this. After I sign it, I always see a few things I want to change in it. Anyway, here's our bee. Before I end, I had an idea that I want to try. I don't know if it'll work, but it sounds fun, so I'm gonna do it anyway. I'm gonna splatter some of my metallics on here, some of the gold. Don't want it on the bee though, just so it looks like little flowers throughout it. I just thought of that and thought it would be fun. Our watercolor is now dry, so we will take off our tape. I really love how this turned out. Hope you can see the metallic in there, that iridescence it brings. I really love the effect that it will give the overall painting and just the brightness and vibrancy that it does have. It is a very strong pigment color and I find that very appealing. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration and I would love to hear about some new techniques and materials you've been experimenting with lately. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and to click that bell so you can be notified anytime I post new videos. If you would like to see another review, you can check out this over here, and I'll see you in the next video.